and welcome to Hot Issues. We are the release of two Guantanamo-based detainees to Ghana. What are the full implications of this? Why did the United States decide to persuade our government to take the detainees? What could be the possible implications of all of this for relations between the two countries? Welcome to Hot Issues. Hello and welcome back to Hot Issues, and we are continuing our discussion on the release of two Guantanamo Bay detainees, ex-detainees, who have arrived in Ghana and the full implications of that, what led to those decisions and so on. And we are particularly privileged to have somebody from the U.S. Embassy, somebody who must know the public affairs officer of the U.S. Embassy, Mr. Daniel Fennel, is in the studio with us. So you're welcome to the studio.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Now, what is the historical background? Guantanamo Bay Detention Center, how did it happen?
Sure. So during the conflict in Iraq and Afghanistan, specifically in Afghanistan, this is over 15 years ago, when the United States had particular individuals that they thought would be dangerous or who they thought would be able to provide information about Al-Qaeda in the war zone. In some instances they were interrogated by the United States and some by others, and one of the places that they held people was in the Guantanamo Bay military camp. They created a detention zone there. Over the course of years, the utility of that facility was no longer required for the activity it was designed. When President Obama was elected, this was in 2008, the 2008 election in November, he came into office in 2009, he determined that one of the elements of his foreign policy would be to close the detention center. Part of it was that he thought, and I think many people still today, the majority of people agree, that having a center like this, for the few benefits that it may have provided as a facility, was far outweighed by its symbolism. The symbolism in the extremist population. It became a recruiting tool that there was a prison camp that went on. It became controversial even in the United States to have it open. President Barack Obama determined that closing it was the best course, and that set into effect a study. The idea was to look at who was being held there, see who they were, what their background was, look into their history, look into their affiliations, perform a real investigation on the individuals. In instances where they have to be prosecuted, the idea is to prosecute them. In instances where they should be determined to not hold a significant risk any longer, they should be released back to their own country and be able to go home. In some instances, the people asked to go home can't go home. Almost half of the people in that category, in that low-risk category, are from Yemen. And as you know, Yemen is not in a position right now to be accepting returnees. So in those instances, the plan is to look for allies, for friends, for friendly nations that are organized, that we have confidence in, and to approach them and ask if they can help. And over 50 countries now, 55 with Ghana, 55. Countries have accepted some former detainees that are in that category.
You've not gone beyond the history. I wanted us to stick with the history.
Very good.
Yeah.
You're the professor.
No, sir. But how come that the U.S. could not keep the detainees on mainland U.S.?
So I think so. First, as you know, they've never been in the United States. They've never been brought to North America. And after Barack Obama came into office, he was facing a Congress of opposition, and they passed legislation actually as part of a spending bill for the Department of Defense that prohibited them from being housed in the United States. So it's possible to prosecute them, but you can't house them, even in a prison. So that's against the rules now that they've established.
But why would the United States make rules which prevent its so-called enemy combatants from being housed in the United States?
So I think that, well, first, I don't think all of them are enemy combatants. In the instance of those that are in the lowest category after this review, we don't think that they pose any risk, that they're not really combatants at all, that they're no longer in a category of danger. But the rule exists. In democracy, laws are passed in a political process, and this was a political process. So it wasn't the United States deciding something, it was Congress deciding something, but we're all bound by those statutes. It's not the first choice. I think that the president's first choice was to find those of most significant risk where there was evidence against them and put them on trial. But it's been difficult to do that politically so far. It could be that
I
it
just
happens.
want to understand why even Congress, you know, as a political process, as a legislative process, whatever, would decide that persons who allegedly were risky, you know, persons who could harm United States interests should not be kept on United States soil, but in Guantanamo Bay or any other country for that matter.
So your question is, why did they even go to Guantanamo to begin with, or why were they not brought to the United States afterwards?
No, why did they even go to Guantanamo to begin with?
So if we cast our mind back into the history, there were two significant conflicts that the United States was engaged with, one in Afghanistan and the other in Iraq. I think at that time, everyone was erring on the side of supreme safety. So there were many rules that were brought in about travel, what you can bring on an airplane, whether you can bring water on an airplane, how much toothpaste. Everyone was frightened and erring on the side of the supreme safety because there was an active combat was taking place at that time. If you remember, there were actually attacks in the United States that we're trying to defend against. And so I think that the tilt of public policy early on especially was towards maximum security and keeping people at arm's range. What we've changed in the last 14 years is we've had the luxury of time to use analysis, to bring all of the information forward and to look like you would in a prosecuting case. So just like with lawyers are different than soldiers, policemen are different than war fighters. It's a different process. It's a civil process for the purpose of pursuing our policy. And it's a change of circumstance. The world is different today, and our goals are distinct as well. We're trying, I think, during the George W. Bush administration, the policy of the United States was to fight and kill threats. During the Barack Obama administration, it was to identify threats that were necessary and to mitigate and to diminish the likelihood of conflict. And it's a change of policy, it's a change of presidency, it's a change of party, and it's a change of strategy.
Okay. Now, what processes have taken place, I mean, since then, you know, leading to the decision to free some of the detainees or all of the detainees?
Sure. So I don't think they want to free all of the detainees. They want to look at them one by one and get an understanding of each individual. What risk does each individual pose, if any? Were some of them merely young men in the wrong place at the wrong time? Or were they merely being brought in for information? Or are they people who have been, that we think might continue to hold risk or hold a leadership position? And is it unwise, therefore, to release them? And, in fact, is there information? Is there evidence? Is there evidence of crimes that they've committed or actions that they've taken that should be prosecuted by a legal court? And that analysis takes time. In the case of the full background, which was about 4 or 5 years ago, they took all of the information that had been gathered. So that included reports that had been made in the past. It included allegations that had been made. Things like taking fingerprints and very basic criminal activity, seeing whether they actually were the people who were connected with the allegations or not. We didn't want to be in a position where decisions were made without the facts. There was plenty of time to do so, as you've established with your earlier question. There was plenty of time to do so. And it was a joint panel appointed by President Obama. And that included the Department of Defense, the Department of Justice, the Department of State, representatives of the intelligence community, and it also had as a member the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who is the top military officer advisor to the President on military affairs. And the advice was that if any member of this camp was to be released or to be transferred back to his own country, that all of those members of that joint task force, it had to be unanimous. So everyone had to agree. If they all reviewed it, if the Department of Defense reviewed it and they said this is risky, then they would not be transferred. If the Department of Justice reviewed it and they said the evidence may suggest this criminal activity or the risk is too high, they would not be transferred. So the only people transferred to their own country or to a third country, if necessary, were those that had a unanimous a slate in that process. And the process actually is available for your viewership to review. There's a website that has all of the ins and the outs of how that took place, and I'd welcome people to take a look at that.
And that took 14 years to determine.
Well, he appointed this group, I think, 6 years ago, and they conducted a review over the course of 18 months to 24 months.
Yeah, but the people had been in detention for 14 years, some of them.
That's true. That's true.
Isn't that an awful long time?
I think it is. In the case of those that are innocent, it was far too long.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now you've determined that some of them are of low risk. What does that really mean?
What does low risk mean?
Yeah.
Well, I think that in this case they were looking at the likelihood that the individuals would engage in either criminal activity or be reintegrated into an extremist organization.
Mm-hmm. Now the two gentlemen who are being relocated to Ghana, what category do they fall in?
They're in the lowest category of low risk. So in this case, the review, my understanding is there were 3 categories. One category was where we have evidence to prosecute. They will not be released. There's those that we continue to have doubts about or that require additional information, but there's some question and their risk is in dispute. Those will not be transferred yet either. And the lowest category is the 2 individuals. The lowest category is the lowest risk category, where their background indicates that their involvement or their connection with an extremist organization was rather brief, or that they were very low-level functionaries, and that over the course of time they've exhibited no proclivity towards continuing that kind of activity. Time has gone on, as you mentioned, 14 years. They're older people. They've exhibited an interest in having a life. They were in prison really when they were very early in their adult life. And in this case, they actually were presented with the option of coming to Ghana. And these two men welcomed the chance. They started studying about the state. They started rooting for the Ghana Black Stars. It's an interesting opportunity to be adopted not only by the world, but by a specific culture that has a reputation for hospitality.
One of these 2 men is Mahmoud Atif. Is that right?
Atif, yes.
Yeah, Mahmoud Atif. Mahmoud Atif worked with Osama bin Laden. Did he?
So I'm not sure what your source is, but I'm guessing that you have looked at the WikiLeaks reports that came out in 2006 and 2007. Reports that came out.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, you have me at a bit of a disadvantage.
But you know of the report.
Well, I know a lot of things, but unfortunately, the report that you're referring to is a classified document, and I'm not allowed to discuss its contents.
But it's available now to everybody in the world, who wants to find it.
That is a strange irony of process, isn't it? But I'm still an American official, and I'm not allowed to discuss the documents that haven't been declassified.
But if indeed it turns out that he worked with Osama bin Laden, would you still put him in that category?
Well, I won't answer on that specific point because I'm not allowed to discuss the content. But let's discuss in a more roundabout way. If individuals were associated with someone who was a criminal, or if they were associated with someone who was doing something nefarious or bad, that doesn't make them the same level as the criminal. For example, you have somebody who's a driver, who's a messenger, who was involved in the family. If they were a low-level fighter, if they were a guard in the front of the shack, those are instances where you see them having been associated as young people, but over the course of years, they're no longer in contact. They're not a leader. They weren't a philosopher. They weren't radicalized in that sense. And so what the committee did is they had access to all of that information, more even than you've seen. Even though you've seen some that looks interesting. But the classified information that was released with WikiLeaks is only piecemeal, and it's also old. 2006, 2007 was even before President Obama was elected. It was before the fighting was over. And information that's received in order to say yes or no to hold someone for questioning is different than the in-depth prosecutorial analysis that's brought to bear by that interagency squad that wanted to look on whether it was a good idea here, now, all these years later, of moving to the next stage of these individuals' lives. And so what I would say to those that have seen these documents that I'm not allowed to discuss is to put them in the context that they were used, but the information that went into them was also scrutinized, and modern information was scrutinized, and everything else was looked at as well. And when you have the totality, this committee that I mentioned, this task force that President Obama selected, was looking at everything else. And the most recent report is the one that indicates that today they have very little risk.
But Atif Muhammad was not just an accessory, he was a participant in that war. He fought in the war. He had training. He had training. He was a fighter.
Well, from what I've been told, not from these documents you're referring to, but what I've been told, both of these individuals were recruited and had a participation of something in the order of 4 or 5 months before they were captured. So the difference between the time that they entered the group until the time they were captured, a very brief career. It wasn't enough time to even, they wouldn't have been able to finish a course at Legon in that period of time.
Nonetheless, they acquired skills that are quite worrying. Skills in bomb making?
I'm not aware of that. I can't comment on the specific skills that they bring. But again, it's a decade and a half ago. There are many members of productive society who have skills. The idea is to give them other skills that they can use to live a life as adults in a peaceful community.
A review by your own security agencies indicated that these two men are very dangerous men.
So I don't think that's true. I think the report that you're referring to was by one agency. It wasn't by our security agencies. It was by the Department of Defense, and their job is very specific. It's to fight a war and kill enemies.
But they came to the conclusion that these are dangerous men.
Well, they made the accusation that that was the case. But as I say, that accusation was many years prior to the more thorough, in-depth, and more modern, up-to-date analysis.
In fact, in one of the reports, it was stated that Atif Muhammad, or Mahmoud Atif, was still saying that even if he was released, he would slit the throat of Americans.
So
he is reported to have made this statement himself, that he was committed to slitting the throat of Americans.
Mm-hmm. So I'm not able to comment on the content of these reports.
I understand that.
Do you? Because you continue to ask me the same question about their content. So if we want to fill the time, my suggestion is we move on to topics that I'm allowed to talk about.
You are free at any stage to say that you would not answer the question, or that you would not want to comment on what I'm saying. You're free to do
I think
that.
I've been clear.
Yes,
so
but I can make those questions. I can bring up those questions.
I propose that we make use of the time so your viewers can get some benefit from my presence, because you could just talk to the camera alone. But let's talk about the process if you'd like, and whether it's a good idea for Ghana to participate. But if you continue to go line by line on a report I can't answer, it's not a good use of my time.
Mr. Fennel, the people of Ghana, in their thousands and tens of thousands and so on, are frightened by what has happened. It's my duty as an interviewer to clear doubts and so on. So if there are reports that these are combatants, well-trained combatants, who are still committed to slitting throats and so on, I need to bring it up.
But still, the word still in English means today. So the report that you're referring to is from 2006. It's So that's not still. That's not today. It's not current. It's not up to date. It's not modern. It's not the most recent report, and it doesn't reflect the attitudes of the analysis of the American government. So the tens of thousands, I think, do bear a responsibility to make an informed decision based on the best facts and the most recent facts. So last night with your colleague, I made an analogy. It may work or not. But if I am sick one day here in Ghana and I go to the doctor, and the doctor says, "You have a terrible influenza. I'm going to tell you you should take some medicine, get some rest." 10 years later, if I go to a doctor, he's not going to say, "You have influenza." He's going to examine me under the conditions that exist today. He's going to take my respiration, he's going to take my blood, he'll look into my eyes, he'll make me look in the periscope down my throat. You want people to get the best information that is today. So if you have utterances from somebody from 10 or 15 years ago, it's not as useful as if you do a full background check, if you're able to check with the neighbors and do fingerprint scans and understand what they're doing today and observe them over the course of a decade and a half. Observe them at close quarters at a decade and a half. And I would propose that the best information is the most recent information. And the best information, the best report from any source would be one that goes into the full depth in order to really understand the character of individuals. So regardless of whether there was a single accusation in 2006, my recommendation is to see that we have more up-to-date information today. And just like a health of an individual, you want to get the best information from the totality of the best doctors, the best medical people. You don't rely on something or someone's suspicion from 2006 if I was making a decision today about my health. You would want to be informed by it, but it would be one of many pieces of information you bring in. And probably the weight would fall on the side of the most recent and up-to-date pieces.
You're absolutely right about influenza, but we are not talking about influenza here. We are talking about combatants. Combatants who are indeed focused on an ideology, and an ideology of hatred, an ideology which leads them to commit mass murder and so on. That's what we're talking about.
We have no, but we're not talking about that. We have no information that these individuals have engaged in mass murder. And we don't think, after a full review today, that they have that ideology, that they exhibit that. In fact, they've renounced it. They say exactly the opposite. In the interviews, their interest is to live a normal life. They hope to move on and be able to see the sky and perhaps have a family. They want to be able to get an education. It's the dreams of all humanity, really, are shared by these individuals. Over the course of many years, there are many former combatants in many walks of life who have moved on to the next chapter. In this case, though, the totality of our information is very, very different than the accusation that you may have read about. And those instances are different than we see today.
Well, viewers, we're going to go for a very short break, and we are in conversation with Mr. Daniel Fennel, who is the Public Affairs Officer of the United States of America. And we are talking about the two Guantanamo Bay detainees who may be in the country as we speak. Short break. Welcome back to Hot Issues, and we have the privilege of talking to Mr. Daniel Fennel, who is the Public Affairs Officer of the U.S. Embassy in Accra. And we are talking about the two detainees who may be two former detainees of Guantanamo Bay who may be in Accra now. Now, sir, are they in Accra?
I'm not sure of their geographic location, but they are here in Ghana. They arrived last Wednesday night, the 6th of January, and the government of Ghana are their hosts.
How did they end up in Ghana? What went into the decision to bring them to Ghana, and how were they accepted into Ghana?
So there was a review once they had a list of the individuals that they thought would be safe to transfer. They thought was eligible to be in that category that we discussed, the low-level, low-risk category. The analysis was first, can we return them to their own country, to their home? In many instances, it was yes, and that was done. In many instances, it was impossible. The two that came to Ghana are originally Yemeni citizens. And as you know, right now, there's a conflict, an armed conflict in Yemen. There's a lot of unrest. And it doesn't appear as though the host government of Yemen is qualified or has the resources and attention to host people coming out of the detention center. It's also not the right environment. If you bring people, you want to give them a chance to be in a society that they can have a life rather than in a conflict zone where they had left 14 years earlier. And so the partner countries that we were looking for, the friends, the allies, are those that we have respect for, that have the competence, that are technically able, that have the resources, and are willing to do so. And the United States approached several partners. There are 55 different countries who have taken the former detainees of Guantanamo Bay. And the president specifically was in touch, President Obama was in touch with President Mahama. Here we talked to the government of Ghana. They considered it. They thought about the pros and the cons. They discussed what the arrangements would be, what support we could provide. And they decided to go through it. And we're, quite frankly, we're very grateful. We see it as something that helps achieve President Barack Obama's goals of closing this detention center, which has been a difficult process. Difficult politically, it's difficult physically, but we think that doing so has a strategic benefit of diminishing the likelihood of recruitment for extremist groups in the Middle East. So President Mahama committed. The government of Ghana has stepped up, and in fact, Ghana, in this instance, shines as a regional leader. We see them as a leader in other areas, but this is an instance where they're showing leadership, friendship, support, and it makes the world safer and a better place.
So this arrangement was basically between President Barack Obama and President Mahama of Ghana.
I believe that President Mahama was the final decision maker on behalf of the government.
Now, why didn't you keep them in the United States of America?
Sure. So as people have raised the question, of course, technically they never were in the United States. So they couldn't be kept there. They had to be returned. So the idea was to return them to their own home if they weren't criminals that we wanted to prosecute. So in the instance of where there were crimes and evidence against them, they're not being released. So those people that are risks or that we think bear some responsibility for significant crimes or murderers, et cetera, they actually are being maintained in the base until they can be prosecuted correctly. But those that are lower risk, that they have no evidence against, are trying to be returned back to their own home. So nobody wants to bring them to the United States, and we're trying to get them back eventually. But
why don't you want to keep them in the United States of America?
Politically, the Congress of the United States, which is now controlled by the Republican Party, is different than the political party of President Barack Obama, who's in the Democratic Party, and they have passed a law prohibiting the United States from housing former Guantanamo Bay detainees in the United States. So the federal government can't bring them to the United States.
Why? It doesn't answer the question why.
They passed the rule. You mean why did they pass it?
Exactly.
Well, many analysts think that it's a political motivation to thwart President Obama from making progress on this issue.
How do American citizens, how do you think the American citizens will react to harboring these ex-detainees in the United States of America?
Well, it's hard. It's a hard imaginary question to ask because they're not being asked to do so. President Obama had proposed prosecuting the worst detainees who were criminals, who had performed acts of aggression against Americans, and so that's actually a violation of American law. And this prohibition passed by Congress keeps us from doing that yet. So unless there's a change in the statutes, they won't be able to try to do that.
But the two men you're sending to Ghana fought against the United States of America. They are described as enemy combatants.
Right. Well, I think that's accurate in the sense that they were part of an organization that was fighting in Afghanistan at the time. But the analysis that we conducted indicates that they were not leaders, they were not significant players. They may have had information about the leaders. So if they had worked, for example, for someone who was central to the Al-Qaeda information network or to some of the leadership, if they had had access to those individuals, they were very useful targets for interrogation. They were able to provide information that helped prosecute the war, even during the Obama administration. So the elements, what you might call someone an enemy combatant, is really someone who is supporting a group like Al-Qaeda. But the analysis indicates that they had not committed crimes that were prosecutorial crimes, and that we didn't have evidence to bring them to trial in this regard. And over the course of 14 years, their attitudes are observable and questioned, and they have exhibited an interest in moving on to a new chapter of their lives, as is the case with many young people who get involved in nefarious activity.
Fox Television in the United States alleges that there have been some financial considerations, leading to the government of Ghana accepting these two men. Is that true?
So no, it's not true. The United States has not paid Ghana in order to take the individuals, and the decision was made really in order to support the policy of the President Obama. The idea is a political question. Can Ghana support the United States? Do they have the capacity to do it? Is there any risk that they're undertaking that is unacceptable? And the analysis was that they would support us in this regard. But I think that's normal. Ghana and the United States are friends. We've been friends for decades. We support each other in many different ways. It's not unquestionable. Ghana doesn't always do exactly what we want. We don't always do what Ghana wants. But we work together very, very well. And we've worked together in areas as diverse as military cooperation and health. Combating the Ebola spread, for example, was headquartered in Accra. We work even now with USAID in health and education. So if Ghana can help the United States in certain instances, I think they're willing to do so, because we've been a good friend and we appreciate the friendship and support that Ghana is exhibiting here too.
Who is paying for the upkeep of the two men?
So it's a shared expense. The upkeep, we're contributing some for the monitoring and the upkeep of the individuals. And the government of Ghana is paying.
Who is paying for the upkeep of the two gentlemen?
You mean for their accommodations?
Accommodation, feeding, transportation, upkeep.
So we're contributing some money towards that, and the government of Ghana is making all the arrangements, taking care of it.
Is the government of Ghana paying for the upkeep, or part of the upkeep?
I think so. So
the government of Ghana is using Ghanaian resources to pay part of the upkeep of these ex-detainees?
Is that so difficult to imagine that Ghana would pay for something that's happening in Ghana? I think that it's laudable. We should be proud of Ghana.
No, I just want to understand whether the government of Ghana is using Ghanaian resources to pay for the upkeep of these gentlemen.
So I think it's a shared expense.
Who is also paying for the security of these gentlemen? They are monitoring and so on. Who is paying?
It's a shared expense.
That's also shared?
Yes.
The government of Ghana is paying part of the expenses?
The government of Ghana is, under the Ghana Constitution, is responsible for the security of everything in Ghana. So they are keeping track of it. They're better at it. They're smart. And we think that they're doing an excellent job.
But I thought that these were low-risk, ex-combatants.
Yes.
Who should not pose any risk, any serious risk at all.
There's an old expression that we want to exhibit trust, but we also want to verify.
That's an interesting one.
I think, and that's probably all for the best. You can see, even today, that there are questions raised in the public. You are representing some of the questions today very well. And the best way to avoid any worry is to make sure that these men are monitored well, and that everyone keeps track of them, and that way the risk goes down to zero. So we don't want to just throw it to the four winds. We want to make sure that they have a chance to move through the rehabilitation of their lives in a way that we can verify. And I think that's probably very wise.
Who is doing the monitoring? Just Ghanaian security personnel?
Yes.
Do you have American security personnel also watching them?
So I think that we are partners with Ghana in many different areas of security. So in areas of maritime security, in areas of different exercises that we participate in the region, the United States and Ghana work together very carefully. So if the United States has information or news or anything that we can pass, we certainly are going to do so. But the physicality of the individuals is all under the watchful eye of the Ghanaian security. And the review that I mentioned earlier incorporated a decision on whether the partner countries, so this is 55 countries they've gone to, and Ghana is in the top 55 now, we'd say, who have the good capacity to perform the security duties necessary, and we have great confidence that they're doing a great job.
Do you have American security personnel in Ghana participating in the monitoring?
So we don't have, as far as I know, we have no American people that are, whose job it is to keep track of these individuals, but we certainly have American security experts partnering with Ghana in many, many areas of things, including making sure that our Ghanaian partners have the right resources and information.
This would certainly not be the first detainees from Guantanamo Bay to be released.
That's right. So we're almost up to 188 people, I think, have been released from Guantanamo.
There's a history that some of those who were released, who you considered to be of low risk and so on, ended up in combat again. Ended up committing atrocities again.
So over the course of the years, we have 188 people that have been released. Of that, I think we have less than a half dozen who we say have been reaffiliated in different places, and they're all captured. So in this case, the monitoring is something that's important that we want to keep track of. But I don't think, if you look at the population, what is the percentage of a population that commits crimes? We want to make sure that these folks have the best likelihood of pursuing the right path. And the overwhelming majority, 95, 96%, 97%, whatever that comes out to, of everybody who's gone through this program has been successfully moving on a rehabilitation path. I'll also say that in instances where there's been lapses, those have been learning experiences. And so the models that we have, we're able to take the good pieces from them and share it. And the Ghanaian security folks are very smart, and they're able to adapt that to what works best here.
What is the guarantee that the two men we have in Ghana would not be part of the 3%?
Well, I think it's an instance where we have high likelihood. We're experiencing very good success in the other places where we've attempted this. These individuals have exhibited a willingness, an outward willingness, an observed willingness to participate. They chose to come to Ghana. They were selected. It was a combined effort to make sure that there was a proper fit. And I think that increases the likelihood. Is there a 100% guarantee of anyone's behavior? I would say no. There's no 100% guarantee of anyone's behavior, of your behavior, of mine. But what we want to do is give these folks, these individuals, the highest possibility of success and give Ghana the highest likelihood that they will be able to participate in a way that's useful and not dangerous.
So, in other words, they could end up in combat.
Well, there's very little combat that exists in Ghana, thank God.
Not Ghana necessarily. anywhere in the world.
So they could escape from Ghana and somehow reinsert themselves. That's true of anyone who lives here, I think. We want to diminish that likelihood as much as possible. Is it a 100% guarantee? No.
Well, short break, viewers, and we are in a conversation with Mr. Daniel Fennel, Public Affairs Officer of the U.S. Embassy. When we come back, I'd like to pose a question that I'm sure many of you are already, playing with in your homes and so on. Is it true that the U.S. created some of these groups as instruments of its foreign policy? Short break. Hello, welcome back to Hot Issues, and we are discussing an issue which is tending to be very, very hot. Real hot issue. The relocation of 2 former detainees from the Guantanamo Bay Detention Center to Ghana. And we're doing that with Mr. Daniel Fennel, who is, in my view, doing extremely well. Now, sir. Now, sir.
Not as well as you, Jose.
No, I think you're doing
Thank you very much.
Well,
You're very kind.
You're
very
quite
kind.
Professional and difficult to interview.
What? I thought this was the mutual pleasure part now.
But, sir, Al Qaeda,
Yes.
Al Nusra, Taliban, and so on.
Boko
were
Haram.
Not
ISIL.
Boko Haram.
Okay. All right.
Well, were they not created as instruments of U.S. foreign policy?
So tell me what the theory is on that.
Basic question. Were they created as instruments of U.S. foreign policy?
So an instrument of you mean did the United States invent them themselves independently?
The Taliban was created in Afghanistan to fight against Soviet invasion, so-called Soviet invasion of Afghanistan.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Al-Qaeda was trained and financed by the CIA.
Or so they say. Well, I'll say this. There have been instances where armed groups have sprung. I think this is true throughout history, that armed groups have sprung up from the remnants of or the beginnings of the kindling wood or the spark of training to achieve a single goal, and they've morphed then with that training and with those armaments in some cases, with that expertise, in order to achieve an alternative goal. And so there's been a lot of analysis in Afghanistan about whether the Soviet invasion, for example, the mechanizations to resist the Soviet invasion created the groundwork for what eventually became the movement of Al-Qaeda. And I think that there's something to that. I think there's something to look at in that. In a broader context, we should talk, I think, about what it is about foreign policies in general that may encourage or discourage armed combatants or extremism, because we don't have a perfect history. The United States doesn't have, no country does, but the United States has very high ideals, but we don't have a perfect history of reaching all of them. In the case of Afghanistan, I think there's something to what you say in the analysis of the training and as a change of administration happens, a change of interest, no longer a Soviet threat, a withdrawal of one invading force, no longer a lot of contact. And the question is, were some of the same individuals, some of them morph into a new organization? I think that there's a kernel of truth, or more than a kernel of truth in that, for sure. But the Al-Qaeda was never invented by the United States to be Al-Qaeda. It was never invented as a tool, as an extremist group, to be a tool of American foreign policy. But I think that your question goes to something deeper, are there mistakes made by using resources that lead to unintended consequences that can be very dangerous? And I think the answer is yes. If I may, I'll make reference. President Barack Obama last year was talking about the fight against terrorism in the world. And he said, we have to find people who are doing violence and stop them. We have to identify combatants and we have to face them. And if they do things badly to us or to our allies and our friends, we will find them and we will do that. And he's been successful. He was able to eliminate many threats. But he went on to say we also have a responsibility to think about what are the conditions that exist in the world that would encourage a young person, or not a young person, that encourages a thinking person to take up arms and fight as an extremist. What is it that exhibits that type of environment that encourages that? And if we are contributing to that, we have to stop contributing. And he named a few things. He said, first, we have to recognize that if you have a host government that is corrupt, that's fraudulent, that's hurting the people instead of helping them, that's not responsive, that's not democratic, the likelihood historically goes up that the individuals will be willing to participate in something that is illegal because they have no allegiance to that environment. He said economic development. If the first world, so-called, remember they used to call it that, the first world, if the developed countries, the rich countries, set up an economic construct where they're just taking money and becoming richer, if they're exploiting poorer countries and developing countries, that creates a circumstance of unrest that's higher than it would be. And he said very explicitly that the policy of everyone in the world should be about equality. It should be about getting everyone an opportunity to grow their economy, to have a job, to be able to conduct trade. And it should be everyone's interest to have governments that are responsive to the people, to do what they want, and that are not hurting them. And I think that those are high ideals, quite frankly. Those are high ideals. But
very high ideals, but did you finance Osama bin Laden and the other terrorists?
Well,
did you help them to create Al-Qaeda? That's the question.
So I don't think we helped them to create Al-Qaeda. What we, I think,
if you give them money and weapons and so on, you help them.
I didn't help them to do that, though. I mean, if I had a son and I said, I want you to go buy a beautiful jacket to go to school, and he takes it and he buys cigarettes instead, did I pay him to get the cigarettes?
No, you paid them to buy weapons to fight the Soviet Union, to build Al-Qaeda, and to build the Taliban.
But it wasn't to build the Taliban. It was in order to be a resistance movement against what we thought was an illegal and unjust invasion of that country. And later it was used to a different purpose.
Al-Nusra, which is fighting in Syria now, is an affiliate of Al-Qaeda.
Yes.
Are you not giving Al-Nusra substantial support even today?
So I can't. I work here in Ghana. I barely understand Fufu and Kelewele, so I can't speak to all of those instances that are happening everywhere in the world. But I think that what's happening in Syria is that the United States and its partners, so there's many different groups that are working there, are trying to ensure that there is not a spread of that violence outside the borders. It's a very difficult puzzle, very difficult puzzle. But if you have advice on what should be done if there's a solution, we would be delighted to speak to you and hear what you have to say.
You would take my advice.
I would like to hear it. I don't know if I'd take it, but I would like to hear it.
Now, sir, you visited the chief imam of Ghana. Why?
So the American embassy wants to talk to all sectors, all stakeholders, as they're called, to make sure that we understand if they have any concerns and we can provide any information to them.
Is that not going to exacerbate religious tensions in Ghana, given the fact that the Christian community has already opposed the relocation?
Well, I don't think every Christian opposes the relocation. So if individuals are asking questions, it's appropriate. In a democracy, all citizens and all leaders should ask questions, and I think that over the course of time, it's only been a few days. Over the course of time, opportunities like this will present themselves, we'll be able to explain the facts, and I'm confident that Ghanaians will call upon their hospitality. They'll understand that this is a low risk, that they're proud to contribute and support Barack Obama's policy. They're making the world a better place, and that this will be supported.
Well, thank you very much for coming to the studio. It's been a pleasure.
Doctor, it's a pleasure. Thank you very much for your work.
It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.
And thank you very much for coming.
Okay.
Well, viewers, I do hope that we've managed to throw some light on the issues. I do hope that after an hour, we've managed to help you come to your own conclusions about these developments. This is where it happens. Best in news, best in current affairs, best in entertainment. It's goodbye from all of us from TV3, cameramen, makeup artists, the producer, and so on. Goodbye till we meet again. Bye-bye.